I've told some stories about some land that is, I guess it would be northwest of Austin, here where I live. On one side of my family, it was my dad's family, his real mother that died when he was 3. It would be her family's ancestral home. That area right there, it's an area called Joppa near Burnett. And I had a guy that was up in a tree stand. And one of these things, I was planning on telling the story on the Halloween episode, but I'm not going to give a whole lot of detail because I might still go back and go over. He shot one that was almost point blank crawling up a tree. And he said that it looked like a piece of flesh came off of it, but there was no blood. Like, it was literally left shoulder. Said it should have tore it right off. It was a 22-250. And he said it happened 20, 30 years ago. I don't remember how long ago it was, but he said he was a young guy, climbed up a tree, and the thing just went after him. And it wasn't huge. It wasn't a huge creature, but it was highly aggressive, which doesn't surprise me. I've gotten a lot of reports out of that little area right there, a little niche. And he was up in the tree, and he just fired down, and all it did was just blow like a piece of chunk of meat off of it, but there was no blood. And then he hit it between the eyes, and he saw like an indentation, like in a cave, like it caved it in. And there's a lot more to the story. That's why I said I was going to tell it on the Halloween episode as one of my Dogman stories. But the crazy thing is that it didn't kill it. It didn't do anything. It the physically knocked it down, and then it just kind of shook its head a few times, and then he said that one of the weirdest things, like when it started to walk away, that it looked like water coming off of its body, but it wasn't blood. And later, his friends, when they came to pick him up, of course, he's up in that tree. This isn't the day of cell phones where you could call. He was just there. He was stuck. And they came to get him, and they heard gunfire, but they figured he'd bagged a deer. Well, eventually they come to get him, and he's like, and they looked. It was still enough daylight that they looked, and there was no blood. And the thing went off on all fours, but it did stand up on 2 legs. And he said he looked into the eyes were very human-like, although they were yellow. And he was just like, dude, it looked like a human, like in the face. You could see the humanness of it, but it was very aggressive, vicious, and he was definitely on the menu, and it was physically climbing up the tree. But to fire and hit it twice, point blank, that's pretty crazy, man. And I mean, that guy is a guy that I actually interviewed face to face. Like it was crazy. Like, and I had talked to him a while, like a long time ago, and I had done a lot of interviews around that time from that area, and so I went back into my archives and I saw his name on there, and I was like, oh yeah, that guy. I had talked to him a long time ago. So got back in touch with him through the magic of Facebook, and it took him a while, but he responded, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember talking to you. So I had actually met him once face to face, and it was like us drinking at the pub, at the bar, and then we talked a little bit about it, but there was all kinds of stuff going on. So we had always said, hey, we're going to talk again. Well, I finally got to communicate with him a couple months ago, and basically, the story he told me didn't change from like 10 years ago when he told me, but he went into more detail about it, and it was a horrific incident. So this guy ended up, long story short, he shot it twice. No blood.
Has he been back in forest hunting since? Has it traumatized him?
No, he said he's done. He actually works at a power plant now, I think out near, I don't want to get into it, but anyway, he works at a power plant, and he moved, and he was just like, yeah, I don't go out much. But where he works at the power plant, there's been a couple sightings of these creatures because they're drawn toward places of energy. And
that's so interesting. Jumping on that, where we touched on these things seen around military bases, a bit out of my area. But there is a story from 1999 which I've just written about in a new book, and I've called it the baboon werewolf. And I've changed this lady's name, but I've spoke to her, well, a good few times. I've changed her name to Lucy, and it's in a place called Prestwick. And back in 1999, she was 18 years old, and she worked as a trainee administrator at British Aerospace in Monkton, Prestwick, Scotland. And in the compound, in the area where they worked, they also had a military base, and HMS Gannet was in the compound at the time. It was separated by fencing and armed guards. But it's such a strange encounter, because she said she went to work at, let me just get my facts right, at 7:15 a.m. this particular morning in January. And the security let her in, and she's walked to the back gate, and I've just got a bit of paper here. This is helping me with notes, this. So the journey usually took her about 8 to 10 minutes. And as soon as she started walking, she knew she was being watched. And this is a weird element. Again, I mean, you've touched on it, I've touched on it. The fact that there's some kind of perception, there's something going off with these things on another level that isn't normal animal behaviour or what you'd attribute to normal animal behaviour. So how many times do we hear this? So at some point in her journey, she heard a very loud crashing sound, like, I don't know, cans, boxes falling over or crashing to the floor. And she looked, and she said it came from inside the apprentice block, the trainee apprentice block, and she stopped in her tracks. She waited a few seconds, then she noticed, or she said that she noticed a strange shape appear at the doors of this old wooden shed. And she thought she kind of makes sense of it, or trying to, and she thought, well, that obviously something's fell on them, or they fell down, and that, because whatever it is crawling. So she thought somebody was injured. Looked like they were crawling out of the shed. So she took a few steps closer, and then she said she heard a weird noise. Not human. It was a growl. She heard this, and this is on a military base, high security military base, and also part of British Aerospace. And that's when she realised it weren't a person. She said, I looked. She said it was like a new dog, like a huge dog, like a Newfoundland dog, but even bigger. And she explained that she knew about these dogs. Her friends got one, and she sort of drawing a comparison to that. So it took a few steps forward and stopped, and she remembered looking around to see if anybody else were there. She said nobody's about, and this is an 18-year-old young woman, girl. She said it just took a few seconds. She said it was standing upright on two legs. And it were a lot closer, as she's looked around, she's looked back, and it's on two legs, and it's closer, maybe 5 meters away from her. Absolutely huge. She described it as standing sort of slightly hunched, must have been 7 foot tall, even in that hunched over stance. And she said to her, it's only thing she can describe it as a werewolf, and she's only 5'3" tall, she said. And it had really pointy ears at top of its head, not at the side of its head. Dark fur, massive frame, huge shoulders. Its eyes looked yellow. Did glow yellow, sorry. And its face and this is a one that we get all the time, and I'm sure you guys do. Its face looked like something from the American Werewolf in London. I mean, I wonder where they got that face from, people, because obviously it's from descriptions of people that have seen things like this. Its arms looked like human arms, but muscular, hands and claws at the end of its body, just massive. Everything from, and it had a waist, which, as she was talking to me about it, it still kind of surprised her. It's, bodybuilder type physique.
Oh yeah.
She described its legs as very long and very muscular. So at some point, the mailman used to go around on a cart, and she heard the sound of this cart coming, and this thing looked and let out a huge growl and just bounded off, disappeared. Then she said the rest of the day, security from the military complex, which she'd never seen before or since, I think she worked there a few years, they were all over the place. There were helicopters everywhere, so they must have known about it. I mean, well, this thing captured and it escaped. What its purpose were on military base, Josh, I've really no idea. Do you know? But an interesting story. And then the local papers, so people can sort of Google this if you wanted to, because the internet, you can find anything. She said in the local papers, because she faked being ill and went home after she'd seen it and had the rest of the week off. She was that sort of traumatized. The local papers then talked about the Prestwick baboon. And it's still there on the internet, this stuff to look at. That's why we call it the baboon werewolf. She says because 2 policemen said they'd seen this thing that they thought resembled a baboon bound across the road. Huge animal, it says. The papers don't give an indication of its size, and there's a few reports of it still on the internet to find. So if you type in something like the Prestwick baboon UK, you're gonna find it. So she said, but I knew it weren't a baboon. I saw it up close and personal. It in her eyes, her terminology, it was a werewolf. So another unusual story, and what we've got there again is things coming out close and around military bases.
That's a very common theme. Here in America, Edwards Air Force Base, they're known for a white Bigfoot.
Really?
Like an albino type, white colored Bigfoot. Gotten a few reports of that. Then 29 Palms, there's one known to be kind of a tall, rangy looking Bigfoot, which is a military base, a Marine Corps base. I don't know why they call it 29 Palms. There's no palm trees there. It's just called that. And it's a desolate, it's where you go to do your desert warfare training. And so anyways, there are Bigfoot that are known in different regions, and they have different looks about them, different, whatever. Here's my question, though. When you were describing what she saw, it was like that's what I saw. The pointy top, the ears. It was black or smoke, maybe a smokish gray, but it could have been the lighting. I always wondered if it was maybe the lighting, but we all seem to agree on it because it wasn't just me; it was me and my friend and part of his family, and we saw what you described. The upper body was like a bodybuilder looking type. The legs were really muscular, but the bottom part of the legs was very, like the backward bent hawk looking legs. How dog legs look. They kind of, taper down. Yeah. That was basically what we saw. And it was just a timber wolfish looking, but just like an aberration, and I don't mean apparition. Let me explain this because I said that on my show one time and somebody's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. An aberration is different from an apparition. Aberration meaning something you don't see that's kind of a grotesque looking thing that you're not accustomed to seeing. And an apparition is a ghost. And I have to explain that to the smart people that are listening. But some people don't know that. And I had somebody really say something, it made them look ignorant in the comments on YouTube. It was like, oh, you don't even know how to use words. And I'm like, yeah, okay, thank you, sir. But, I gave them some very sound advice, and, that was the end of it. But I have to point that out. But it was something you don't see every day, and it stays with you. Now, here's I wanted to delve into this real quick. You were talking about black dogs. Now, of course, I don't know, a lot of people know about Old Shuck. That's a very, very common story. And I told a story on my show once about a guy getting lost in an area that was known for werewolves or dogmen. And he began to hear howling and whatever. And this black dog appeared on the road and he began to follow it. And it actually ended up taking him because he was kind of lost, and it took him, long story short, back to his home, and I think it was actually the people that he was visiting or whatever. Yep. Something kind of similar like that happened to me when I was young, and I always thought it was a Bigfoot, and I still to this day believe that I've had maybe a few Bigfoot encounters, but never saw it. If that makes any sense, I've never seen it. Like I don't. My wife claims that we saw one. She got a better look at it than I did. All I saw was the back, and I don't know what it was. And so I don't claim it, but I never saw it. But I more than once I felt like that it was there, and I thought for sure it was a Bigfoot. I mean, because there's a lot of them. I mean, a lot of stories of these things in Texas, and I used to live in a heavily wooded area, and we would hear weird whoops and howls and all kinds of stuff, man. And like hear like things fighting and we didn't know what they were. And it didn't sound like any animals that we knew of. And we spent a lot of time out there in the sticks until I was 15 when I moved into town. And that's when I saw the werewolf looking thing. We are calling it the Texas Wolfman. Now, we're in the process of creating an action figure line, and me and my partners have kind of agreed on the name of what I saw just as the Texas Wolfman, because we don't really know what else to call it. Everybody has their own, like there's the Michigan Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road. And so mine's just the Texas Wolfman because that's what it was. It was in Texas and it looked like a wolfman. And
what year, Josh? What year did you see that?
1990, October, which was Halloween night, 1990. The guy that I was hanging out with that I saw it is now a preacher in my hometown. And we had just come from egging cop cars. So yeah, we were doing bad things like we always did. Me and my friend, we were in trouble a lot. We got locked up multiple times as kids. Luckily, they seal the records and you don't have to, whatever, unless you do something really violent, then they can look back at it. But, I haven't been in trouble since I was 17. And so I just I stopped getting in trouble and doing stupid things. But anyway, my mom was like, I'm not coming to get you. Long story short, I ended up seeing that thing. And a lot of people know the story. I'm not going to get into it. We're here to hear your stories. But
yeah, Josh, I realize that, but I'm just intrigued. Just bear with me for 5 minutes or 2 minutes. What did it do to you? What was the fear? How did you feel?
Oh man, the fear is something you can't even describe. I mean, for me, first you're trying to process what you saw. And then, you're trying to, you can't even wrap your mind around what you're looking at and what you're seeing. It started off looking like, okay, there's this German Shepherd sitting in a ditch. Then it's a giant wolf. Then it looks at you and it looks like, is that a wolf man? You don't know what it is. And then it stands up and runs across the road. Then it goes, cuts back, into the neighbor's house's yard. And I say that because we were on the corner, and then my friend's house was right next to the house that was on the corner. That house is no longer there. That was on the corner, but it had a giant fence around it because they had pit bulls, and the city had I guess made them leave or something. I don't know the whole story, but anyways, there was a giant fence there, and this thing went up and was manipulating the fence physically, and so I was able to run past it. And so I've told the story on DER, episode 55. It was so terrifying for years, having nightmares about it. And then it kind of, I always thought it was like a physical creature. And I thought that it was my own mental, my own mind kind of messing with me and just making me relive it or, and then, for years and years and years, you're getting reports of these things doing metaphysical type things. They're not, So then I started to realize there was one time where I thought it was just a dream, but knowing what I know now and how many people I've interviewed about these things, I don't think it was. I woke up to this thing, what it looked like was lunging out of my closet, and I opened my eyes and I was like, oh, okay, I was still asleep. But I felt like this really, really palpable fear. Like you could almost touch it, it was like it was. And when I got up to take a shower and I kept thinking I was going to see it, and I was just, it was so scary. And then I had an overwhelming fear of it, that same presence felt the same to me. On 2 other occasions, one, when I was working a security detail on a post, I was by myself, I thought this thing is around. And I don't know how I knew that. I just did. And then once when I was just laying there on the couch watching TV, in early spring, one year when probably 15 years ago, and I was just laying there on the couch and I had the back door open with like the sliding screen, and I kept thinking that it was in the backyard, and I was like, why is that mental image in my back? And I had 2 big dogs, and I don't know where they went. They were nowhere to be found. And I was like, where are they? And this thing, I just felt like it was there. Like I had this. So then I started realizing that a lot of people go through this. Now, of course, going on to DER, you weren't really allowed to talk about the other than the physical aspect of it, because the host of that show wants everybody to, he's got a certain narrative he wants everybody to follow. So you can't get too far into the esoteric because then he'll shut you down. So what ends up happening is, he says he's helping people. Well, he didn't help me. He kept trying to convince me. It's just, it's just the fear that you have and all this in your mind and whatever, and that there is no metaphysical aspect to it. Well, over the years, eventually, he admitted to me that that's not really the whole deal. And I was kind of aggravated by that because I was always being told by pretty much everybody in this community that I first teamed up with that's what it was. And I kept thinking, I don't totally agree with this. This isn't correct, because there were too many things that were happening, that made me think that this thing was more than that. And then 29 years later, my friend's brother tells me, hey, I saw this black vapor coming off the back of its neck. And I'm like, wait, what? I told you that story, Paul.
Yeah.
And so, it was like, that was like, whoa, okay, I didn't know that. That's what he saw. So if you take all that together, all things considered, this thing is very metaphysical. And I could get into tons of different stories about it. Yeah.
I'm on the same page with you, Josh. I really am. And I get where you're coming from. I mean, the first show that I did on that show years ago, I think it was number 64 or 62, I can't remember off the top of my head. And I did touch on these things being, not necessarily being true flesh and blood in the truest sense of the word. And I did feel like that kind of suggestion didn't want to be heard. But that's the way of things, isn't it? But I think there's too many people, the altered environment that people experience when in close proximity to these things, the altered environment, the electricity, the feeling in the air, all of these things attribute it to something more than just a normal animal. I mean, one of the stories in Wolflands is from three guys who are from a town called Rotherham here in the UK. And they decided, once again, wild camping. They decided to go to the forests of North Yorkshire. Three friends, and there's only two gone on camera. And they're in a ravine, an 800-foot ravine. Now, I've been down into the ravine on numerous occasions now with these guys. Took them a few years to talk about it. They'd been listening to our live stream, which we do on a Thursday night, and one of them reached out to me. He said, we're in this ravine. And the guy who hasn't gone on camera, the guy who doesn't want to speak, we'll just call him George, for the purpose of this story. He says we've made us way into it. It's took us an hour and a half to get down into it, and we set up camp. It's a thick old pine forest, and there's native trees, in oak trees, all sorts. It's an old forest. There's a river running through the bottom of it. It's in what's called the Forge Valley, and he starts saying, we're being watched. We've got to leave. There's something watching us. We have to go. He said, and he's getting really, really nervous. And it'll touch on the fear that you talked about in a moment. He said, and we can't understand it. He's a bit younger than them. He's late 40s. These guys are early 50s. So it's just not like him. He's just a quiet guy, just goes about his business. And we've got to go. He says, well, it was impossible. It's night. And anybody who's familiar with forests, the UK, any country in the world in night time, you've got spiky branches from pine trees and spruce trees sticking out all over. He says, we couldn't have got out. He says, the ravine was steep, 800 foot deep. We were there for night. He said, but he's getting frightened, and we don't know why. He said, and then, I don't know which one saw it. I think it was Steve that saw it. He said, a huge pair of amber eyes lit up in the darkness. Now, I took a surveyor's tape in, and they were 45 foot away, because we found their camp, we found where the fire was, and we knew where it was stood. He said, and Jimmy, who was a bit more wildlife savvy than the other two, because he goes all over the place, or he did until seeing this. It stopped him for a few years. He said, and I'm looking at it and thinking, I can't think of an animal to assign these eyes to. That's his exact words. He says, because they're bigger than a cow's eyes. They're huge, but the shape of human eyes and the glowing amber. Now, that's another attribute that's not anything in the animal kingdom. They haven't got a torch on this. This is the dead of night in a deep forest. They're self-illuminating eyes. So they're watching them. And all the time, I'm careful not to say this guy's name. He's getting more and more frightened. At a point where they think he's going to run off into the night. And they watch this thing for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's there about 36 inch off of the ground. And they're looking at it. And he says, I just didn't know what I was looking at. He said, it was the strangest thing. But we're trying to console our friend. He said, but in the end, I couldn't take it anymore, Jim said. He said, and I stood up. They've got a small fire and a little tent there, a little bivvy. He says, I stood up and I took 2 or 3 steps towards it, making the shooing sound, like shoo, and like shouting at it. He said, and it disappeared. He says, and I thought, oh, thank God for that. He says, and then I turned round. And I could see in the firelight the look on Steve's face and the other lads' faces, and their jaws had literally just dropped. And that's when Steve comes in, because we've interviewed them, together. And he went, I knew he hadn't seen it. He never saw it stand up. He said, he said, I knew he'd not seen it. So Jim said, when I turned round and looked back from seeing these eyes that were 36 inch off ground, I'm now looking at 7 foot in the air. Where he estimated the eyes to. He said, and I put a sticker on a tree and, sort of stood back 45 feet and we got the guys to sort of say, yep, we think it were about there. There's a bit of moonlight. And he says, we can see it in moonlight. And its shoulders are huge. Steve said, you couldn't have fitted 2 men into that shape. I've never seen out as big. It were like slightly stooped forward like an American footballer. He said, if you'd have asked me to draw a werewolf, I wouldn't have drawn that. He said, seriously, wouldn't. He said, but that's what it was. They were reluctant to say it word at first. And in fact, when I asked them what it was, Steve said, well, it were a werewolf. And Jim said it were a dog man. And he broke his words up just like that. He said, its ears looked ridiculous, Josh. He said, they were too pointy. It were almost cartoonish. He said, and it kept turning to its right. He said, and that's when we saw the muzzle. He said, and that were ridiculous. It were like Wile E. Coyote. He said, everything about it, he said, were exaggerated. The shoulders, the arms, they didn't see legs. They only saw it from waist up. And these guys were terrified. And he said, we thought it were growling at us. But we realised after a time, it were breathing. Its breathing was so powerful. That's what the heard. But I asked them both what they felt as regards fear. They said it's a good job they'd got their friend with them, because they were having to physically hold him to stop him running away. Said, and he's a big guy, like he's well over 6 foot. But that helped them in a way, because he said we could see it in his peripheral vision. We'd all been looking at it. And we're not talking like a 5-minute sighting here, guys. It watched them all night. And Steve said, in the end, I just wanted it to be over. He said, I wanted to die. The fear was so great. I knew I couldn't get away from it. And the bile, the venom that it were sort of putting out onto them, the feelings, I said, well, fear on a scale of 1 to 10. Steve went, and I loved the line that he used. He said, I didn't know I'd got that much fear in me. He said, I've never, ever felt anything like that fear in my life. So that took them, it was 2018, I think it was August 2018 when they saw it. And he reached out to me in 2020, and we spoke for a few times. And the guy, he'll openly say, he were absolutely in floods of tears on the phone. Apart from Jimmy, and other guy won't talk about it, apart from Jimmy, he'd never spoke to anybody about it. He said, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. He says, my wife thought I were having an affair. I'd changed my personality. Yeah. He said, my kids have noticed difference. He said, everywhere I went, I could see this thing. I could see it in my mind's eye. If I closed my eyes, it were there. Yep. He said, I were missing work. And he actually said it's done him a lot of good now unloading the story and speaking to me, and he's realised that I'm not a counsellor, am I? But, you know, it was somewhere to channel this story and actually to realise that he's not on his own. He's not going mad. Lots of people have seen these things, all from all different walks of life, as you know, Josh. And, you know, there's a truth, there's a reality to it. And once again, where's it coming from? It's coming from the realms of folklore, where these things have been reported for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, you talked about the Black Shuck. The stories of the Black Shuck emanate from the forests of North Yorkshire and the coastline of eastern North Yorkshire. Whitby primarily, Kettleness, Ravenscar. They've all got stories of the Black Shuck. The ancient carvings that the Vikings left behind have got the carvings of wolf with what they perceive as the Norse god. I think is it Tyr or Tyre?
Tyr, the hand of Tyr. His hand,
with his hand in Fenrir's mouth. All these things are there, and all the terminology. I've missed out quite a lot of the links that are going to be in Wolfland, just because I want to retain a little bit of the things people. I don't mean they're going to go wow, but they're going to think, good God! I mean, I've never the name of one of the forests. Is just uncanny, and the things that are in the forest, the names of the things in the forest, all relate not to the wolf in particular. They relate to Fenrir, and once it's explained, you don't have to scratch your head a lot and think, well, he's clutching at straws here, trying to make them links. They're there. Do you know what I mean? And they were near a river as well, called the River Derwent, which actually runs along the back of Flixton and the Seamer Cars and the Flixton Cars. When people talk about these things being seen along watercourses, that same river runs to Flixton, which is about 11 miles away from these forests. So it all kind of ties in, Josh, you know. All the ingredients are there. What I like to impress upon people, and I know we've done it today, is the fact that they're not pure flesh and blood creatures. There's something else attached to them. The lower silence, that feeling when you're sort of immersed into a different environment. We'd got a guy up on the cliff tops who never actually saw anything. He was at a place called Scalby Mills, which is it's renowned for big cat sightings. There's woodland there as well, and cliffs, and UFO sightings at Scalby Mills. But what else? He's gone up there to do some stargazing. He's not gone up there because he's looking for unexplained phenomena. He's not looking for UFOs. And if you look at if I put a link onto somewhere, if you've got anywhere where I can put it, and I'll put a link to Wolflands, the promo, he's sat there telling us the story. He said, and I've just poured myself a drink. I'm just sort of watching the sky, and he said it was just like somebody had pressed pause. He said suddenly I couldn't hear the sea anymore because he's on the cliff top. I couldn't hear the seagulls because they cackle all night. That's where they've got better eyes than owls, you know, and bats, because they're flying about all night long, these things. And where I live in East Yorkshire, in Bridlington, there's phone wires and everything, and they managed to dodge them. So I don't know how we got to seagull's eyes there, Josh, but there you go. He says, I'm sat there, he said, and just like somebody's pressed pause. He said, and then I felt fear, and I don't know why. He says, the environment changed, but I felt extreme fear. He says, and I don't scare easy. I come up onto these cliff tops alone quite often when I've got free time away from my wife and family, you know, and I get a few hours spare. He said, now, if you've ever been to the horse racing and you've heard the horses when they come thundering past, he said, I looked in the distance, I could hear something very big running through the undergrowth, really big. He said, and it got louder and louder. He said, and I just dropped into fetal position. He said, and if somebody had said to me an elephant or a rhinoceros were just about to run over the top of me, I'd have believed it. And I were ready for impact, and everything just snapped back to normal. So there's no creature sighting there. There's a kind of creature experience. But nevertheless, it's the altered environment. It's just the strangeness of the area, and I don't think that I'm particularly living in an area that's so special that it's unique to the world. I think these areas exist everywhere. Like we've got Skinwalker, the Beast of Bray Road, which I touched on earlier. I would love to know, because I know people have researched it extensively, if they get UFO reports there, big cat reports there, and what other unexplained phenomena, should we say? Not necessarily the big cats being unexplained, because I know you've got them. We don't have them native here in the UK, yet we get big cat reports. It's just a paranormal soup.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what you were when you said Sculby. That my ears perked up. I don't know exactly where that is. I don't know how it's spelled, but I know Skull was one of the sons of Fenrir. Now Skull and he had a brother. Don't tell me Hades. Which means it's H-A-T-I, I believe. Going off the top of my head here. Oh gosh, and we talked about this, Paul. I'm getting glasses.
Yeah, no worries.
Can't look up and read. So I ordered glasses, folks. When they come in, probably in my live stream, you'll probably see me and go, "What the heck?" You know. But by the time this plays, I'll probably already have them. But I'm having trouble seeing close up. I can see far away. But anyway, Hades is. I think it translates to like the one who hates or he who hates, whatever. They chase the sun and the moon, and that's that, and they're the ones that end up trying to free Fenrir, and then somehow I don't know the whole story. I have to go back and reread my history. I've read all kinds of mythology because I believe there's truth in it. Yeah, and so they end up freeing Fenrir, and Fenrir, of course, he does what he does. Ultimately, he breaks his chains, I think, because of their interference. But I think that I think Odin captured them and threw them. But anyway, just the fact that is the story, and they bring about the destruction. Now, Hades and Skull are not good guys at all. They are monsters. And of course, Agraboda was the troll type female that Loki, the god of mischief, bred with, and she gave birth to like a bunch of different types of wolf-like creatures. Agraboda is considered to be one of the mothers, and of course the troll is very prominent in the Scandinavian legends and myths, and of course the troll is interchangeable with the what's it called, the beings that Thor was always fighting with and killing. Yeah. I forgot what they were called. They're synonymous with trolls. But anyways, that's the whole story. So you have, like you said, the hand of Tyr. He had his hand bitten off. You know, I think Tyr. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's the one that chained him up or whatever.
Well, what it was, and we both might be wrong here, Josh. The gods in Norse mythology realized that Fenrir was obviously monstrously powerful.
Too powerful, yeah.
And they didn't know how to contain him or kill him, and they made chains that he kept breaking. And then I think they got the trolls, the dwarfs, to make a chain that was supposed to be unbreakable. But because he was cunning in mythology, that Fenrir asked that the god Tyr put his hand in his mouth before he was chained up, because he assumed that he thought it was a trick, and if he were chained and he couldn't break free, then he would bite the hand off the god, which he did. He ultimately ate Odin as well. And Agraboda, is that how you pronounce the name? I think it's
Angraboda or something.
Right,
like that.
When Fenrir was her son, and there was a huge serpent called
Jormungandr.
These strange offspring that were supposed to have appeared as a combination of Loki and the name I can't pronounce are there, and I don't know. It's just a fascinating story, and like you said, there's grains of truth in it. And then jumping to the place names, you said Scalby, very close to Scalby. You've got Hundale Point on the edge of the North Sea.
Yeah.
And Hund meaning hound.
Yeah. Crazy though, like the ogres, that's what they were, that Thor was always fighting. And there's a lot of legends of these creatures too in England, but they were miniature. And
we didn't touch on the names of Flixton when we were talking about the Flixton werewolf.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That used to be called Wolfland in ancient times. And a few miles from Flixton, we've got Hunmanby, which broken down means, and this is the ancient text, it's not me that's trying to make it fit, farmstead of the Houndman. Now, how apt when we're talking about something akin to a werewolf, farmstead of the Houndman, Hundmanby, Hundymanby it used to be known as. So that you've got all these connotations to the wolf, to the dog, to the bipedal dog. It's all there. You know, some of the stories that I've got, Josh, I mean, they run back. Well, some of the people are dead. I mean, we run back to 1948. We run back to the late 30s, early 40s, where a farmer called Jimmy Keith claimed he'd seen the werewolf on the Flixton cars. You need to explain to people the cars are nothing to do with motor vehicles. It's CARRS, it's Reeds and Elder, it's wetland. It's the lake that was Lake Flixton, Star Car. And this thing's been seen, but it's pretty barren. The forests of North Yorkshire, I don't know, 5 to 11 miles away, they're absolutely dense. But the cars are pretty barren places. Nowhere for anything that essentially would be carnivorous to hide or to breed, or there's no cave systems there. There's cave systems on East Yorkshire coast. But, it's just a fascinating land.
You got to wonder too. Like, there's so many of these legends of these werewolf type creatures, dogmen. I've argued with so many people, and they'll tell you, well, they hunt animals and this and that. If there's this huge breeding population of these creatures, they're going to wipe out whatever wildlife is there. I mean,
carnage. It would be carnage.
It would be absolute carnage. People. I argued with a guy the other day in a group, and I don't know why I even argue with these people, but I do, because I try to teach people. So then they're like, "Yeah, water, yeah," and then they start arguing back, and it's ridiculous. My wife's like, "Why are you wasting your time?" But this guy said, "Megalodon still exists," and I said, "I highly doubt it." And he's like, "Why do you doubt it?" And I said, "Well, first of all, we would be finding carcasses of whales with humongous bites taken out of them."
Yeah,
I mean, you know, there would be evidence, boats being attacked. Man, there was a guy. People
just want it. Well, what happens? And you'll have seen these YouTube films where a megalodon sighted, and it's not.
Yeah, those are fake. I mean? That's a fake show. They were trying to dramatize it, and even the actors, you could tell it was like when they were talking that they were like actors. I mean, come on, I don't know how gullible people can be, but. I sit there and I go like, I'm shaking my head and I'm going like, you know what? If these werewolves were breeding and running around, you would see them, but they would be destroying things like you wouldn't believe. And so that's why I tend to feel like, for the most part, they're coming from another, like, fourth dimension. And I explained it on my show. Like, I drew a picture of a 2-dimensional character and I said, look at this. Okay. This is how the 2-dimensional character, he can't perceive us in the 3rd dimension, just as we can't perceive those in the 4th dimension. The 4th dimension can see us. They can see everything, and I tried to explain that, you can't, it's too, this is too hard to fathom, I guess, or wrap your mind around. But I have so many accounts of these things coming out of balls of light and then going in and out of, like, the Serbian werewolf. This thing was halfway out of a portal and halfway in while it was grabbing a girl that worked as a housekeeper, up, going up the stairs. This thing was grabbing her, and she was like absolutely terrified. She didn't speak good English when we tried to interview her. We had to have the lady of the house had to translate for her, but it was absolute terror. She was just like afraid to even talk about it. She thought it was going to come back and get her, that it was around, that it could hear her, that it was invisible, and it could make itself visible. It was very much like a spirit, and this thing grabbed her and tried to pull her. She thought it was trying to pull her into another world, and she was just like to be devoured or killed, whatever. I've talked to so many people who have had so many different. One lady, and I don't want to get into this story. It's an in-depth one, but she saw just a pair of floating yellow eyes in her room, and this is a horrific story. And this one happened in, I think, Redding, California, or I think that's what it was. When she turned the light on, and there is a floating, like, giant wolf head with a wispy body that she couldn't really make out, and it was slowly materializing. She didn't wait around to go, oh, let's see how this turns out. No, she jumped up. literally opened her window and jumped out of the window. This was in an apartment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And she like ran down the road. Like she's like, and unfortunately for me, she's like, I didn't have all my clothes on. And she was like, I'm out. She didn't even care. And,
well, I think that's the best option that she took, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
And then her husband is driving down the road. It's like 11 o'clock at night. And he's like coming home from his swing shift. I guess what she said he worked, and sees her screaming, running down the road. And so they go back in there. There's not a trace of this thing. They see nothing. They don't, and there was never anything ever again. That was it. I mean, it was just, there was some stuff that led up to it, which I'm not going to get into, but it was just crazy, you know? And so go ahead, Paul.
No, it just kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Or whether you bring attachments back from these areas as well. I don't necessarily mean that incredible story that you've just told, but I found myself on cliff tops late last year, with a guy called Bob Brown, and one of my daughters. She was staying with us. She was in process of moving house. She's not massively interested in subject to UFOs, but she gets along with Bob, and she came onto cliff tops with us. Now, I don't know where this fits into things, but it's an interesting little story. Nevertheless, we're up there. I've set a camera up. I'm hoping to film these unexplained lights that appear over at sea. And Gemma and Bob Bob's got a powerful torch. He gives it to her, and she says, "What's that white thing there, Bob?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a sign stuck to a fence post or nailed to a fence post in distance." So then he realizes there isn't one there, because he's come up with me years and years, and he sort of gets the torch off her and puts it on it, and as they're looking at it, it just literally drops to the floor and disappears. So that was that. But that night, me and my wife Mary, we went to bed. We left Gemma watching TV in this little room between our main living room and the hallway. And she when I got up in the morning, she says, "I nearly had to come and wake you up, Dad." I says, "Why?" She says, "I was terrified." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, how old's Gemma? She's 36. So she's not a teenager. That's what I'm getting at. And she doesn't normally talk about anything like this, so it's not every time she stays at our house she has a weird experience. She said, "I'm sat watching TV, and the sofa's back to the wall, and there's a hallway behind it, a brick wall, and then a hallway. Our hallway, not an adjoining house or anything." She says, "And suddenly I thought I could hear thunder." She says, "And I turned TV down. I thought, what the hell was that?" She said, "And then growling started," and she called it growling, like a huge dog. She said it was so deep and guttural that my insides, I could feel them shaking. She said, "Now we're terrified." She said, and I sort of got up, and I gingerly went to the door and looked down hallway, and I thought, shall I wake my dad up? I don't know what to do. I've imagined that. So it kind of makes you wonder if this stuff can actually follow you. Do you know what I mean? Because I've not got an explanation for that at all, Josh. You know, it's such a strange one, you know. Obviously we haven't got a cryptid sighting here, listeners, but we've got a strange experience, and I'd like to bet that some of your listeners can relate to that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the black dog, we in the Latino culture, especially the Mexican culture, my mother was Mexican, you know, and my dad is white, but one of the things that you know, in Mexican folklore, the cadejo, they call it the cadejo, and it is actually distinctly different from the hombre lobo. The hombre lobo is actually the wolfman or man wolf. That's something that is actually in my hometown that the Mexicans that I grew up with, some of them, the older generation would tell us, there's this hombre lobo, and then there's the cadejo. The cadejo is like it's a curse type thing. Someone who is celoso, as they say in Spanish. It's like jealous. You're jealous, and you have a spouse, and you think they're cheating on you or something, and so you teach them a lesson. You summon the black dog. You do the ceremony, and the black dog comes running into the field and will attack someone in the cotton field or wherever they're working. My mother and her family chopped cotton when they were young. And so it was just a backbreaking work that they would do every year. And the older generation, not my mom's generation, but the older generation, they had stories of the cadejo going into the field, tearing someone apart. And then when everybody runs over there to stop the dog or whatever it was that was attacking, the dog would run off. The person would be dead, and it would look like they'd been ripped apart, but then they would look perfectly healthy when everybody got up to them. And the coroner's report is they died of, the cardiac arrest nearly every time, caused by heat stroke or whatever. It's crazy. I mean, so you got all the stories of, and then you compare that to the black dog, which very much sounds like a cursed animal. And I've wondered oftentimes if some of these curses were there maybe during the Gaelic times of the Celts, or they just kind of they blended in like with the Saxons because they were Germanic and they had their own legends of that. And then the Vikings come, and then they, that becomes like there's all these different groups of that gave their spin or whatever, did their ceremonies with England, Scotland, and Wales and Ireland and all these different places. And so you wonder if they're cursed or what it is.
It is strange though, Josh. Well, not necessarily strange, but all cultures all around the world, long before we had this multimedia, instant access to knowledge via the internet, long before phones, everything. They've all got a similar kind of creature within their religion, within their belief system, be it Anubis, is it Exol, the Mayon, the dog? Yeah, they've all got and they've all got some kind of connection to the underworld and
Xolotl, the Aztec.
Yeah, it's crazy, and these cultures couldn't have possibly known each other in the earliest of times when these belief systems were being established, should we say. So I think we've got to attach a truth to what we're talking about. I mean, we'd have just wasted 2 hours if we didn't believe sincerely that, that there is a reality to this subject. I mean,
and they're always connected to death. Like Hecate.
Exactly.
It's crazy. She's the goddess of death and dogs. And then, and then Cerberus, you have the 3-headed dog that guarded the entrance to Hades. And of course, everybody knows Hercules is the only one that ever defeated it and got through. But he was also a god, considered a god. And I believe a lot of that, though, and I don't want to get into all that right now, but I could tell you I believe a lot of it was real. It was Nephilim, I believe,
Do you know a quirky story and a short one? Because I don't know what time we've got, Josh. And this is kind of it's a modern twist on it, should we say, although it even goes back to ancient times. There's a guy living in a built-up area. He's living in a little semi-detached house with his mum and dad. I don't know whether, I think he said he were early 20s. Big, well-built lad, now in his mid to late 30s. And he had an heart attack in his early 20s, and he wouldn't tell anybody why. He told a friend of mine, and then I got to find out about the story because he was that, I wouldn't say embarrassed, he just realised nobody's going to believe this story if I tell the doctors, tell people why I've had a heart attack. So here goes. He's laid in bed in his room this particular night, and he woke up in the night and he said there's what looks like, in his words, Anubis in the bedroom. And it walked through the room and walked straight through the wall upstairs and disappeared. And that's what he said. He said there's a second one walking through the room, and it gets to the wall and turns and looks at him. He realises it can be seen. Walked towards him. He said, and it put its hand into my chest. Obviously, non-physical. I'm saying obviously, but just in case anybody thinks it's ripped his chest open. He said, and I had an heart attack. Now, whether he's dreamt this and the dream's been that vivid, he's had an heart attack, but he believes that is what happened. And these stories, I mean, that we're not talking about a werewolf. We're talking something that looks like Anubis, even with clothing. Even with the attire that he had on. What a bizarre story to tell anybody. And he said he couldn't tell anybody why he'd had the heart attack. Nobody could understand why he'd had the heart attack. No history of heart problems and nothing since. But he claims that is the reason. And That's as different as you're going to get, I would think, Josh. As regards a story of this nature.
And it's crazy that there's so many the connections. You just get all these connections to these wolf-like creatures, and the fact that they are in Norse mythology in particular, that they were the spinoff of Loki and Angerboda. And when you look at those two, they're evil. And then, of course, even they understood that the Fenrir needed to be chained up. They were like even on board with that one because that, but I think that the Vikings had such a powerful connection to these different deities, entities, which were really just deities to them. And they invoked magic to help them, because there were several pitched battles that were fought by the Vikings to try to take, I think, Northumbria, which was one of their targets, and I believe that, and so and of course in York, that area. And
we're close to York here. There's a rich history of sort of Viking settlement here, and all the places that I've spoken about today, we've got a very heavy Viking influence. So you're absolutely spot on what you're saying there, Josh.
Yeah, and York, of course, was also sacked, I believe, by William Wallace, wasn't it? I think it was sacked by him years ago.
I don't know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, and they also invoked a lot of magic. There's a movie that I saw years ago with Channing Tatum, and I think it was called The Eagle. And it shows the standard. The Roman standard was stolen, so they had to go into Scottish territory, which was just like the forbidden zone, And so those Scots were practicing a type of magic, when they fell upon them to try to, if I remember the movie correctly, and they showed like their priest. He was wearing like a deer skull, like how some people describe the Wendigo, which I think when they show that deer skull, it could be, like this rake type creature that's the Wendigo, and it wears that as a mask, because I've had people tell me that they've seen that with antlers, and which is people say, well, that was just a later addition. Well, I've had more than one person tell me they've seen that, and that could be like an avatar that was created, a tulpa type thing. But the Scots had the same belief, of this wolf-like creature, and they revered it and honored it. I don't know if it came from their interaction with the Vikings, but the same thing applies. You have this, what could be like a curse, and they use magic, and it just kind of lingered,
Yeah, the ritualistic magic. Yeah, I mean that could act back to the ancient peoples of Starkar, or on the cliff tops here at Bempton and around Speeton, we've got an old RAF base, RAF Bempton, which closed in 1968/70. It's underground. Most of it's underground. I'm not going to call it a complex because it's not. It's a very large area with big rooms underground. It were a radar base. But my point is, when it closed, because it's in such a remote place, it began to get used by a cult, a satanic cult. In the first book, it were rumour. In the second book, I found a little bit more out, and I was kind of brave enough to say, look, there's more to this than just rumour. And in the third book, I knew, because I've actually met someone who were in the cult, and I've met somebody who witnessed sacrifice down there, animal sacrifice people, I need to say. Not that I'm thinking that's good. But what they were trying to do, at the start of it were Aleister Crowley type magic. But after that, it got deeper, it got darker. And that I met somebody who left it because of how dark it was getting. And they were trying to summon demons.
And Crowley and Jack Parsons and the guy from, I don't want to say that giant religion that's not really religion. I don't want to say his name because you could get in legal trouble. But just put it that way. The guy that founded that, they did commit a lot of magic together. And they did what they did, I believe, was Boleskine Castle, Loch Ness. There were, and a lot of the UFO activity, a lot of people don't realize this, coincides with that same time frame. They may have opened something up. Yeah. And so,
I've thought that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I've thought, because of the the thing that's been seen on the cliff tops around the coastline does not kind of conform with what's been seen in the forests. It's long and kind of, not say rakish, not the rake, but it's very lean.
Sort of a rangy-looking creature.
Yeah, the descriptions are, it looks like that thing off Harry Potter film, the Remus Lupin. And I just wonder what they've been doing. It's in very close proximity to where all animal mutilations were taking place in 2017 that I looked into extensively. And before anybody thinks that the creature's responsible for that, and well, who's to say it couldn't have been, but the carcasses that I were finding were stripped of skin, eyes removed, ears sliced off, and it weren't just sheep. When I got involved in investigating it, there were 28 approximately done. There were 50 by the time I'd finished, and we never found what were killing them, but it were roe deer, badger, fox, birds, marine mammals such as porpoise. They had great holes through the jaws, and all this is in the area where this thing's been seen. So I'm not necessarily attributing this thing to those deaths, the animal mutilations, but I am saying that it's in an area of high strangeness, and that's why I touched on it a few times during this while we spoke today. I wonder if the areas such as Bray Road, because we know in Skinwalker it's a multi-phenomena area. I'm wondering if your researchers, the people that have identified an area where the cryptid's been seen, be it werewolf type Bigfoot, have actually looked into the possibility that it is a multi-phenomena area, and we're getting a lot more things, not just their chosen subject actually making an appearance in these areas.
Yeah, Devil's Backbone comes to mind out here. I mean, just like you have all these different triangles. There's all these different areas that, where people and I noticed too, if you look at the map of the Devil's Backbone with the three different cities, there is sort of a triangle there. But the sightings and things that I've collected in that area, that you can't really put it in a triangle because they go outside of that. And so, but there is heavy activity within that triangle. But what's crazy is that, and I've talked about this multiple times, like you'll have a rash of sightings around one area and you'll see one cryptid there in that area. Then you'll see in one area the Dogman, and then in the other area the Bigfoot. And then there's ghosts all over the place. And then it's all happening in one area. And when I was driving down Purgatory Road, and there is a cemetery there that is known for a black goat man that has been seen by people I know personally. I look up, and we were coming back from San Antonio, and I see this a silver ball, like orb-looking thing in the sky, and it looked like a BB, and it was just kind of getting bigger, and then it went away, and I tried to wake my wife up, and she was asleep, and Anthony was with me, and Mushu, my old co-host, which sometimes still comes around, but he works a lot. He's my godson, but they were both asleep in the back. And I was like, hey, look at that. And by the time my wife woke up, it was gone. And I was like, look, there was a silver ball in the sky. Up until the last maybe 2-3 years, I had never seen anything in the sky. I had never seen anything weird in the sky. But now I've seen it 3 times. And it's been every time my wife's in the car, and she doesn't see it. And then the one time she gets out of the car and goes into one of the houses of a place that we were guarding, she went in. There was a house that we had that they would let us use for the restroom. And when she came back out to the truck, I was trying to call her, and I said, look, I saw that again, that little ball, like a BB, because it looks so small in the sky, but then it gets bigger.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what that is, but in that same area, we would hear these weird howls at night, and my wife was like, that just sounds so weird. And we kept trying to record it by putting our phones out, and we couldn't pick up. You couldn't hear it. Like if you tried to play it back, you couldn't really hear it. It was so faint. But then it would happen off and on, and the guards would talk about it. And so I saw that ball right in the sky, like at the same time that we would hear those howls not at the same exact time, but in the same area. And then of course driving through Devil's Backbone off Purgatory Road, I saw that ball, and I'm going like that can't be a coincidence. There has to be.
The exact word, Josh. It's hard not to believe that these things aren't connected when there's so much activity, and like what you've just kind of alluded to. It's the spheres of light, they get seen around these forests. People report seeing odd, strange lights moving through the trees not at the same time that the cryptid's been reported, but in the same areas, and so therefore there's a possibility that it is all connected.
Yeah, because they do. I had a guest on not too long ago. Well, then again, by the time this airs, maybe it'll be 3 or 4 months. But he came on the show, and his name was Richard, and he talked about being in a field and these two balls of light, and these things jump out of them, and they were dogmen.
Well, do you know? My time's just about there, but I've got another story. They'll probably wait for another time, Jeff, and I've called it the hairy Chewbacca. And this is a father and 2 children wild camping in North Yorkshire who claimed that they were carried across fields to a UFO by what the children described as hairy Chewbaccas. And, like the thing from skinny Chewbaccas. Let me get my facts right. And there's just piles and piles of stories that I can go through, Josh, if you want to do this again sometime.
Oh yeah, we got to do it again. We got to do it again, and we got to get to the stuff we couldn't get to. Folks, we knew we had a limited time, and that that he was going to have some stuff to do, and so we had to get out what we could. And me and Paul could sit here and probably talk from now until next St. Smithens Day. And if it hasn't been created, once it's created, then that it's crazy because me and you talked on the phone the other day for a while. I don't even know how many.
We said 5 minutes and it was 2 hours.
2 hours. Right. We just talked, and it was like, but we've talked before, and you were pressed for time. But at some point, come back, because like I said, we left meat on the bone there for us to talk about. There's a lot more to talk about, so we're going to get you back on.
Loads of accounts, and still, like you just said, there's things in between that you'll want to fire at me and run past me, and just as I'm so interested in what you've got to say, Josh.
Well, we did we covered the groundwork. We laid the groundwork about these places and the possibility where they came from and the history of it and the mythology. And so we got through that. And next time, maybe we can get into some more encounters, because you have you have an encounter story, and then I have an encounter story. And we can just go back and forth with this all week. But I appreciate you coming on, Paul, and I'm thankful for your time. Your books. You said that the fifth book is your personal experiences, right?
No. There's 3 books out. There's 3 books out already. The Truth Proof series. There's another one coming out, so that'd be Truth Proof for the Fantasy of Reality. And there's another book just about my personal experiences called The Night People. We have a website, truthproof.uk, and anybody wanting to look at the website. There's quite a few original reports on there. We don't plagiarize other people's work, and the books can be obtained through the website. They were for sale, or they were and still are for sale on Amazon, and there's a lot of reviews on Amazon. But if people want to buy them, I'd go to the website. What else? We do a live stream every Thursday night, 7 o'clock UK time, 7 p.m.
And I'm going to be on there October 7th, I believe. Is that correct?
Right, we have wrote it down, Josh. Yeah, and if obviously if something crops up at your end, just tell me and we can reschedule. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I'm going to come on. I'm going to be on there, so I'm going to advertise that pretty heavily before it's time. I'm going to have you come on the Tuesday show. Don't forget, folks, Tuesday, October 5th, I'll have Bartonelli on, and we're going to show you something really cool. And maybe, Paul, you could drop in if you're not too busy. I don't know. You're probably, I don't know, my time, you're 6 hours ahead. So if I'm doing my show at 8, you'd be 4 in the morning. So I think you'd probably be getting up at 5?
Josh, I might make effort. Your show runs for a couple of hours, doesn't it? 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah. I mean, I could do it. I could get you on at 9 or 10. I'm up at that. So your time would be like 5 o'clock in the morning or something like that.
Yeah, I'll do that. Just give me a kick up backside and remind me. That's what I'm saying.
Because I'm going to have to get up, and when I do your show, it's going to be noon for me, and that's my sleep time because I actually work sometimes at night. But I'm going to make sure not to work the night before so I can get up because I want to do your show. I don't do shows hardly ever. Everybody knows that. I've turned down a lot of them, and not because I'm a jerk. But I have agreed to work with a few different people. Tony Merkel, he hit me up, and I'm like, you know what? I might work with you. That's cool. He seems like a great guy. You, Jason Bland, I've actually agreed, maybe Tom Cardos, to do some shows. And I want to do some shows during the month of October. So, yeah, I'm going to be probably doing that. And so that's going to happen. And so, Paul, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for your just everything you do, all the research and the hard work you do. And it's crazy. And you know, somebody who puts in as much work as you do, lifting and everything like that, you're not going to be a lazy person. You know, I notice that people who lift like we do, you're not lazy. You know, you go out there and it takes a lot of work, and what you do takes a lot of work.
You know, and I don't actually do it for any kind of recognition, the training. I mean, I've trained since I was 14-year-old. I'm 58 now. And as I say, apart from you and talking about it today, I don't think I've ever talked about doing any kind of weightlifting or exercise on a podcast. It was just the fact that I'd seen you doing them flies, and I thought, wow, that's quite impressive. And I'd got this little, which I filmed myself. I just shoved camera on a tripod, and you've seen my gym. It just looks like it's been hit by a Tasmanian devil. And don't expect something plush if you're going to watch that, guys. And I thought, yeah, well, I knew somebody in the late 50s who weighs in between 12 and 13 stone, doing 35 reps with them, that kind of weight. And I don't know many people that would do it.
Yeah, it's not easy. You know, I mean, people have no idea. Like it just, you know, they just don't. You know, and then people talk, and they like to say stuff. So I showed a few videos of me lifting. I was doing an incline press. It was like 500 pounds. I did it like 3 sets of 3 with the close grip, which is really hard. And I showed a video of me on the speed bag, just showing you, look, you know, these people talking all this trash. I tell them, sign the waiver. You think you're tough, you know, and come down here. I know all the fight gyms here. I've been down here training for years, but you were impressive with what you did, Paul, and you're impressive with your work. You're just an all-around impressive guy. And I'm glad to call you a friend, man. And I really admire your work, and I have for a long time. And I am so glad that we were able to get back together and finally coordinate it and then do a show together, because that's kind of like a weight lifted off me. I've been holding for a long time, and since Armando had passed, I had kicked it around with my team. I said, should we release that episode? And, you know, and with Paul Sinclair, but there was so much that was left undone and unsaid that I thought maybe we should just leave it alone. You come back, and I'm this one here is in memory of Sal, because he admired you a lot and he really liked your work, and he was real stoked to do that interview. Of course it got cut kind of it didn't finish. So we finally got to finish.
That was part of my fault, I think, to be honest, Josh. And time was just against me. But if we do this again, I'll make sure that we're not covering the same ground. We'll have other things to talk. I'll have other things to talk about. So obviously, werewolf stroke Dogman related, and I really look forward to it. Yeah,
me too. So, Paul, I'm going to let you go, and everybody at the PRT team, appreciate you coming on, and we'll do this again.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Josh. My pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.